like to carry on with our next speaker, Pieter Engelbrecht, and he will be speaking on our coalition is acting better than you are told by the news. Our coalition is acting better than you are told by the news. Pieter Engelbrecht. Pieter is going to be interrogated afterwards by Paul Miller. Yikes.
I just want to make sure all of this works. So, about 2 years ago, just before our latest election, I became very interested in our politics and I've been following that more than I used to historically. Now, obviously, during this following, I discovered that our news thinks that, oh, during the formation of the GNU, this thing is going to collapse at any moment. And after it was formed, there was also a constant hammering of fear that this thing is going to collapse at any moment. When the VAT issue came up, when the Bella issue came out, NHI, the WC, expropriation without compensation, when all of them came out, there was this big thing of our GNU is going to collapse. But I want to challenge that today, that maybe our coalition isn't as bad as the news is constantly making it out to be. At least the way they're acting and the way it's progressing might actually be better than they think. So to do that, I'm going to ask 3 questions. The 3 questions being is, how bad can a coalition get? And to do this, I'm going to look at Bulgaria and the Netherlands. Then I'm also going to ask the question of, what does a good coalition look like? And for that, I'm going to look at Finland. And then afterwards, I'm going to compare South Africa's situation over the last year and a half to those 3 countries. So to start with Bulgaria, they've had 7 elections in the last 5 years. Only 3 of these elections resulted in an actual government being formed. The reason being is that, like us, they need a majority government to be formed for, well, the seats to be formed. They also need, after the election, a bunch of people, if the majority government can't be formed, a bunch of people to coalesce, form a coalition to do that. If that doesn't happen, they have a re-election called a snap election. They've had to have 4 snap elections out of these 7 because they couldn't form a government. Of the 3 times they could form a government, that government lasted on average a year. Then one of the parties would throw their toys out of the cot, have a massive tantrum, exit coalition, and they would have to have a new vote. That's why they've had this situation for the last 5 years. Then there's the Netherlands. Over the last 20 years, or since the year 2000, 25 years, they have had 9 elections. They should have only had 4 or 5. The biggest problem here is that, unlike as for Bulgaria, is when they have had their votes, they don't have this option of, okay, we're going to re-vote again if something can't be formed. They instead have 3 people, independent of the parties, who have to coordinate with the major parties and have to get them to agree to form a coalition if it is needed. In 2017, this went horribly bad for them. It took those 3 people 225 days to get 3 or 4 parties to agree to form a coalition. By the way, the previous record was 208 days, all the way back in World War II. So this was almost a year. Those parties were in a coalition for almost 3 years, then that collapsed, they had to have a new election. This time they spent 299 days just figuring out what that coalition is going to look like. That collapsed a year later, new election, 223 days again to form a coalition. Another year later collapsed, new election. The election was last year. They're currently on day 97, waiting to form a new government. Based on historical records here, they're going to wait another 4 months before they have a government. So, what does good look like? I'm enjoying this. I'm getting my point across. What does good government look like? Finland would be an example of a good government coalition. They've had coalitions since 1918. And the average lasting period of those were about 9 months. In terms of coalition's falling apart. They've not had any since 1975. Before that, they did have a track record of the coalitions not working. But since 1975, they've all served their full term, 4 years. The reason being is they've had new laws in 1975 which required the government or the political party who got the most votes to lead the coalition negotiations. On average, this took about 50 days. In these 50 days, they would generate an agreement document between the coalition parties. This document was more than 200 pages currently, and in that document they agree on everything. Their budget, the policies they're going to implement over the next 4 years or the full term, and stuff like that. This document is so ironclad that if the Prime Minister were to resign and a new one were to step in, those parties would still be required to keep to that agreement for the 4 years that that term is still in progress. Another good thing about Finland is these political leaders also learn about coalitions in their local governments. Meaning it's not just coalition at the national level, but also at the local level. Here they learn the skills of, okay, this is what proper exchange of ideas with other parties looks like. This is how I act in an adult manner when conflicts arise. This is how we overcome those conflicts without me being a baby about it and stepping out of the coalition. So, South Africa. Let's first compare ourselves to the bad countries. You might remember, as Nando so fondly exalted it, how bad it can get. So, in terms of us, no one has really thrown out their toys out of the cart and just exited the coalition. I know the media constantly props at this happening, but that has not happened. In fact, what we're seeing is actually our parties using the court of law to have solved the VAT issue, to solve the Bella issue, to solve the NHI issue, and the expropriation without compensation. The issues they don't agree with, they didn't just fall out of the coalition, but they took it to the court system, which was the mature step to do. It was what we would expect them to do for a mature kind of coalition. They should have been praised for this, in my opinion, by the news, rather than it just being overlooked. Another thing they did right compared to those bad countries is how quickly we formed our coalition. Now, comparing ourselves to Finland, we do not have that ironclad document. We do have some kind of document that it doesn't seem everyone is taking seriously at the moment. So we could improve that. Another thing that I think we could really improve is how we are treating our people at the local level coalitions. They are very much learning this behavior of throwing your toys out of the cart and just being fine with it. And that's going to bite us in the ass. 5 to 10 years from now, when those people enter national level coalitions, and they have to then supposed to have the skills of managing conversation with other parties to just get things working. But all in all, I think compared to how bad things can be, our news is very much overplaying the constant fear and dread of our coalition collapsing. In fact, I think they very much could have done a better job at highlighting the good points we have, which is how quickly we formed the coalition and how maturely we're acting in terms of using the court system to solve disagreements. Thank you.
And now time for the grilling. Paul?
You're not ready, good sir.
No, he's not ready.
He's not ready. Okay. All right.
No,
I'll give you 30 seconds. May I have the speaker's time, please? Madam Timer.
Alright, the planned time was 7 minutes and he did 8 minutes, 10 seconds.
Yeah, you guys are not sticking to your times.
I got the green light all the way until the end, by the way.
Madam Timer.
Innocent.
No. Prepare to speak. All right. Paul?
I think the problem with your premise is that, and not to knock the positive psychology of always looking for the good in something, but one has to face the facts sometimes. And as the Johnny Foreigner here, I might want to point out that the government is one of consecutive failure. Your argument is a positive psychology, I would call it a pasting over of the realities. And the realities are, if I can use the Churchillian phrase, you chose, there was a choice of dishonour and war, and you chose dishonour. You didn't tell the truth about what's really going on. I don't think that we need to continue this kind of participation award politics. You have to tell it how it is at certain points. And so it's no good comparing yourself to, you know, the worst out there when they're functional.
I need to push you for a question. I need to push you for a question, please.
Okay. The government of unity has failed over long-term and short-term objectives. Take one short-termish objective, which is that of unemployment. It's disastrously high, north of 60% amongst youth. Official figures are artificially low, in the 40%. It's the highest in the world.
Yeah.
How is the government of unity fixing that?
No, so I'm not going to answer that specific question. The reason being, I want to focus on how the coalition in itself, the acting of the people in solving disagreements, that's my focus of the speech. Not how government is doing in itself, like all the other stuff. How they're working together to solve the problems, that's another thing. I'm focusing on how they're working together when there's grievances. That's my speech.
I'll put a counter in there. I think it's a lovely way it's a wonderful way, it can't be critiqued from the point of view of the angle that you've come from. But I think in reality, most people want the objective outcomes, not just a bunch of corrupt people talking to, say, another bunch of corrupt people and agreeing on methods of corruption for how to run a government. It's all well and good to say that there are obviously going to be some decent people in government. But fundamentally, if what has happened is just a small step forward, how to address that?
I need to push you to questions only, please.
But
How to address outcomes?
can I answer the implicit implication there? The implicit implication being, okay, so this is a coalition, but nothing is happening. I'm going to come back to France's speech. This is the first time we've had a coalition. We need this to play out as well. And we need them to learn their mistakes. And I'm saying, let's not just focus on the short term. Okay, we've not seen stuff getting fixed. Let's also look at, okay, the positive stuff that is happening. We've seen our inflation be at lowest that it has been for a very long time. And we've also seen, by the way, an interesting fact, tourism was the highest it has been for the last 10 years. Last year, no one probably knows about that. Not a positive thing, not being reported. So my point being, we have to give them a chance to fail. And they're going to have to learn out of these failures. And we can't just critique the failures when they do happen, because we also have to focus on the positive stuff. Because the positive stuff is what keeps us going forward. It's the positive stuff that's going to keep us being like, okay, this was a mistake, but you're also doing good. We can forgive the mistake in light of the good you've done. It's not just mistakes. That's what I'm pointing out. There's too much of a focus of, okay, it's just the mistakes. Let's have a balanced, objective view here. And then we can use that to learn, and from that learn, we can become better in the future.
Okay. You're done.
I can throw in another, which is that
It needs to be a question. It needs to be a question, Paul.
comment on your title. Why would you not accept that the news is going to be invariably negative? And have you heard of ground news?
Oh, no, I know. But my point is, why should we accept that kind of news? Here's a sub-point. Why do we continue consuming this kind of news, knowing it's negative? What's wrong with us as South Africans? We should have pride in our own country. Realize our own news agencies is pointing us in a direction where it's leading the country towards like, okay, let's dissolve the JD. But we shouldn't be following the news in that regard. We should have pride for our own country. We should therefore rather stop reading that news, find something like Ground Up or Ground News, and focus on consuming those instead. Punish the news agencies for not being South African and proud of our country.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Thank you.